Patricia sat in the glass-walled office, her back straight, her palms pressed together on her lap to hide the nervous tapping of her fingers. The meeting room was silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Every late night she had stayed behind, every extra project she had carried, every sacrifice she had made had led to this day. She was ready. Across from her, Ethan Clark leaned back in his chair with the calm ease of a man who never rushed. He was the kind of boss people whispered about in hallways, sharp, powerful, and far too charming for his own good. The millionaire CEO of Clark Enterprises, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that always left people unsettled. His gray suit was perfectly cut, his tie loosened just enough to make him look approachable, though everyone knew he rarely was. His eyes, a piercing blue, lingered on Patricia longer than they needed to, as if he was studying every flicker of expression on her face. "Congratulations, Patricia," he said, his voice smooth, almost teasing. For a split second, her heart leaped. This was it. She could already feel the relief building in her chest, the weight of her long hours finally worth it. Then came the pause. A deliberate pause, the kind Ethan was famous for. And then the words that shattered the air. "We're promoting Susan." Patricia blinked, her breath catching. It felt like the floor had tilted beneath her. She forced her lips into a polite smile, but inside, her chest ached. She glanced down at her notebook, pretending to scribble something, anything to mask the sudden sting. Susan. Of course, Susan was talented, bright, ambitious, and quick with ideas. But Patricia knew the truth. The projects that had saved the company time, the long hours that had turned into dawn, the deals that had slipped into place because she had chased every detail, those had been hers. She nodded, her throat tight. "That's wonderful news for Susan," she said quietly. Her voice steady, though it didn't feel like her own. Ethan tilted his head, studying her. That smirk tugged at his lips, the one that made people both admire and resent him. He wasn't cruel, not openly, but he had a way of playing with moments, of stretching them out just enough to see how people reacted. And now he was watching her closely, as though he knew exactly how much this hurt. Patricia shifted in her chair, her mind racing. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to demand an explanation, to show him the countless charts, the sleepless nights, the forgotten weekends. But something inside told her not to. Instead, she swallowed her frustration and lifted her chin. "Is there anything else?" she asked, her tone as professional as she could manage. Ethan leaned forward then, his elbows resting on the desk. His eyes held hers, steady and unblinking. For a heartbeat, Patricia thought he might say something different, something that hinted at what he was really thinking. But he only said, "That'll be all, Patricia. Good work on the Miller account," and just like that. The meeting was over. She stood, gathering her notebook and pen with careful precision, not allowing her hands to shake. As she walked toward the door, she felt the weight of his gaze follow her. She paused briefly, her back to him, and for a moment she almost turned around, almost demanded to know why he had chosen Susan instead. But she didn't. She pushed open the door and walked out into the bright hallway, her heels clicking against the polished floor. Outside the office, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. Coworkers bustled about, emails pinged, phones rang. But Patricia's world felt strangely hollow. She had prepared for recognition, for the moment her efforts would finally be acknowledged. Instead, she had been left standing in the shadow of someone else's victory. Yet as she passed the glass wall of the meeting room, she caught a glimpse of Ethan still sitting at his desk, his eyes fixed on her retreating figure. There was something unreadable in his expressions, something beyond business, something he wasn't saying. Patricia quickened her pace, refusing to look back again. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself she could handle disappointment, that she had handled worse before. But deep down, beneath the calm mask she wore, a single question burned inside her. The evening air in New York was cool. Carrying the faint scent of roasted chestnuts from a vendor on the corner, Patricia wrapped her coat tighter around her shoulders as she walked quickly down the crowded street, her heels striking against the pavement. The city lights shimmered above her, but they felt distant, out of reach, like stars she could see but never touch. She had expected tonight to feel like victory, but instead, it felt like defeat. Her mind replayed the scene in the office again and again. Ethan's smirk, the long pause, the way he had said Susan's name instead of hers. She could still hear the words, as if they were stuck inside her chest, heavy and unshakable. She wanted to be angry, but anger couldn't hide the quiet ache of being overlooked. People brushed past her on the busy sidewalk, rushing toward their own lives, their own stories. To them, Patricia was just another face. But inside, she felt invisible in a different way, a woman who had given everything to her job only to watch someone else step into the role she had dreamed of. Inside the tall glass tower she had left behind, Ethan Clark stood at his office window. The city stretched out beneath him, glowing with movement and light, but his eyes weren't on the skyline. They were on Patricia. He watched her weave through the crowd, her stride firm, her head high. Even though he knew her heart must be heavy, Ethan was a man who had built his empire on choices hard. Calculated decisions that often made him appear cold. Promoting Susan had been one of those choices. It wasn't about effort, not this time. It was about strategy, timing, and pieces on a larger board. But even as he told himself it was the right move for the company, his thoughts kept drifting back to Patricia. Her determination, her quiet loyalty, the way she never asked for recognition, yet always deserved it. He turned from the window and sat at his desk, running a hand through his hair. For a man used to control, the unease he felt now was unusual. Patricia wasn't just another employee. She was someone who challenged him without realizing it. Someone who reminded him of who he had once been before the weight of success pressed down on him. The next morning, Patricia arrived at the office earlier than usual. Her expression was calm, her smile polite as she greeted her coworkers. She refused to let disappointment define her. She buried herself in work, answering emails, reviewing reports, and preparing for the week ahead. If she couldn't have the promotion, she could at least keep her dignity. But when she reached her desk, a single folded note sat neatly on top of her keyboard. She frowned, glancing around the office. No one seemed to notice. Carefully, she opened it. In Ethan's sharp handwriting, the message was brief. "Dinner tonight. My driver will pick you up at 7. Her heart skipped. It wasn't unusual for Ethan to take employees out for business dinners, but this felt different. The note wasn't typed by an assistant, nor passed through a secretary. He had written it himself. And the tone it was direct, almost personal. She tucked the note into her notebook quickly, unwilling to let anyone see. All day, it sat in the back of her mind, stirring questions she couldn't answer. Why her? Why now? Was this about the promotion she hadn't received, or something else entirely? By the time the clock struck 6, Patricia's thoughts were tangled with curiosity and doubt. She considered backing out, telling him she was busy, but something inside pushed her forward. She needed to know why he had reached out, why his gaze yesterday had lingered as though he had left something unsaid. At 7 sharp, a sleek black car pulled up outside her apartment building. The driver stepped out, opening the door with practiced courtesy. Patricia hesitated for a moment on the sidewalk, her hand gripping her purse tightly. Before she slid inside, the city lights blurred past the windows as the car moved smoothly through the streets. Patricia stared out at the skyline, her thoughts racing. She didn't know what to expect. Ethan Clark wasn't a man who wasted time. If he had asked her to dinner, there was a reason. Back at the restaurant, Ethan was already seated when she arrived. The place was quiet, hidden away from the usual noise of Manhattan. Soft golden light filled the room, bouncing off polished wood and glass. When she walked in, his eyes immediately found hers. For once, the sharp edge of his expression seemed softened. He stood as she approached, pulling out her chair with an ease that felt almost old-fashioned. "Patricia," he said simply, his tone low but steady. She sat, her pulse quickening. It was strange to see him outside the office, away from the walls of power and routine. Here he looked almost human. Their eyes met across the table, and for a moment neither spoke. Patricia waited for him to explain, to reveal why she was here. Instead, Ethan studied her with the same intent look that had unsettled her in the office. Only now it felt different, less like an evaluation and more like a confession waiting to happen. Finally, he leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but deliberate. "I know you're disappointed about yesterday," he said. "You have every right to be." Patricia's chest tightened. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She hadn't expected him to address it so directly. Ethan continued, his gaze unwavering. "You've given more to this company than anyone else, and I know it hasn't gone unnoticed. Not by me." Her breath caught at his words. For the first time since the meeting, the restaurant was unlike any place Patricia had ever been invited to. Tucked away from the busy New York streets, it was warm and glowing, soft golden lights and quiet music drifting in the background. The tables were dressed in white linen, and candles flickered gently as if they were keeping secrets. When she walked in, she saw Ethan already seated near the far corner. He wasn't surrounded by his usual crowd of assistants or investors. He was alone, waiting for her. He stood when she approached, his chair sliding back with graceful ease. "Patricia," he said with a nod, his voice carrying a tone that was softer than the one he used in meetings. She returned the greeting, trying to keep her breath steady. He pulled out her chair, and she sat, her hands folded in her lap to hide the nervous energy running through her. For a moment, silence hung between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy. As if both were unsure of how to begin, Patricia looked around the restaurant, the intimacy of the setting making it impossible to pretend this was just another business dinner. Finally, Ethan leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. "I know yesterday wasn't easy for you," he said. His eyes stayed locked on hers, sharp yet thoughtful. "You deserved that promotion, and you know it. But sometimes business decisions aren't about fairness. They're about strategy." Patricia swallowed, the truth of his words cutting deep. She wanted to argue, to tell him how hard she had worked, how much she had given, but the sincerity in his tone stopped her. This wasn't the polished speech of a CEO. This was Ethan admitting something real. She nodded slowly. "I understand," she replied. Though part of her didn't, she wanted to ask why Susan, why not her? But the questions stayed trapped in her chest. Ethan studied her for a moment longer before letting out a small sigh, the kind that carried weight. "You push yourself harder than anyone else here," he said, "and I see it, even when no one else does." Her heart skipped at his words. For so long, she had felt invisible, her effort taken for granted. Hearing it acknowledged not just in passing, but directly from him sent a warmth through her she hadn't expected. The waiter arrived then, placing menus in front of them, but neither looked down. Patricia barely noticed the polished plates or the expensive wine that was poured. Her focus was on Ethan, the strange shift that was happening between them. As the evening unfolded, the conversation began to drift. It moved away from the office walls, away from numbers and clients, and into something more personal. Ethan spoke about the early days of his company, the mistakes he had made, the nights he had wondered if he was chasing an impossible dream. Patricia listened, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. He was always so composed in the office, a man who carried control like armor. But here, she could see the cracks beneath it. She shared pieces of her own story, her reasons for working so hard, her quiet fear of never being enough, her longing to build something that truly mattered. As she spoke, Ethan listened intently, his attention never wavering. It was unnerving and comforting all at once to have someone like him focused solely on her. The food arrived. Delicate plates that looked more like artwork than meals, but neither of them paid much attention. They ate slowly, their words filling the space more than the dishes did. Patricia found herself laughing at one of Ethan's rare jokes, the sound surprising her as much as it seemed to surprise him. His smile softened, no longer the sharp smirk she had seen so often in the office, but something warmer, more human. Time slipped by unnoticed. When they finally stood to leave, the restaurant had grown quieter, the candles burning lower. Outside, the city was hushed under the glow of streetlights and a clear sky scattered with stars. The night air brushed cool against her skin as they walked to the waiting car. Ethan opened the door for her, his hand lingering slightly on the frame as their eyes met. In that instant, something unspoken passed between them, something that had been building all evening, subtle but undeniable. Patricia's breath caught, though she quickly looked away, sliding into the car before the moment stretched further. The ride back was quiet, but not empty. Patricia sat with her thoughts swirling, her pulse quickening each time she replayed his words, his smile, the way his gaze had softened when she spoke. She told herself this was just dinner, just her boss acknowledging her hard work. But deep down, she knew there was more. When the car stopped at her building, she turned to thank him. Ethan's eyes met hers once again, steady and searching. For a heartbeat, it felt as though he might say something that would change everything. But instead, he only gave a faint, almost reluctant smile. "Good night, Patricia," he said quietly. She nodded, stepping out of the car. As she walked toward her building, she could still feel his gaze on her, the weight of it pressing against her back. She didn't look back, but she didn't need to. The night had already left its mark inside her apartment. Patricia sat in the dim light, her coat still draped over her shoulders. She tried to make sense of it. All the disappointment of the promotion, the unexpected dinner, the way Ethan had looked at her as if he saw more than just an employee. She placed the note from her desk on the table, staring at the neat handwriting. A part of her knew this was dangerous, stepping closer to a man like Ethan Clark. But another part, one she couldn't silence, whispered that something had shifted tonight, something that could not be undone. And as she sat there, restless, Patricia realized that what had begun as a night of explanations had quietly become something else. Something she wasn't ready to admit but could no longer ignore. The week after the dinner felt unlike any other Patricia had lived through in the office. The walls of Clark Enterprises were the same. The buzz of phones and the rhythm of typing filled the air as always, but something invisible had shifted. She could feel it every time she stepped into the boardroom. Every time she caught Ethan's eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than before. His tone with her was different, gentler, more careful, though he never let it show too openly. To the rest of the office, he was still the sharp, decisive CEO. But Patricia had seen another side of him, one that left her restless each night when she lay awake replaying every word of their dinner. Still, she reminded herself to keep her guard up. Ethan was her boss, a man whose world was filled with power, money, and decisions bigger than her own. She wasn't naive. Whatever had happened that night, whatever unspoken understanding had passed between them, couldn't erase the fact that Susan had been promoted while she had been left behind. One evening, as the office lights dimmed and most employees had already gone home, Patricia remained at her desk. Papers were spread across the surface, and her eyes burned from hours of staring at reports. She was too tired to notice the footsteps until they stopped right outside her door. She looked up, and there he was. Ethan leaned lightly against the doorframe, his jacket off, his tie loosened. The golden light from the city filtered in through the windows behind him, casting his figure in shadow. For once, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO. He looked almost human, almost tired, like a man carrying too much on his shoulders. "Still working?" he asked, his voice quiet. Patricia straightened in her chair. "There's a deadline tomorrow. I thought I'd finish this tonight." He stepped inside, his gaze steady. "You always think you can carry it all yourself." She hesitated, unsure how to respond. Part of her wanted to brush it off with a joke, but another part wanted to admit how exhausted she truly was. Instead, she only said, "It's part of the job." Ethan shook his head slightly, then moved closer to her desk. "No, it's part of who you are, and that's why I came." Her pulse quickened. He was standing only a few feet away now, his presence filling the room. She searched his face for answers, but his expression was unreadable, somewhere between serious and vulnerable. Finally, he spoke again. "Patricia, there are two kinds of promotions in this world. The ones that come with titles and offices, and the ones that come with trust. Susan's promotion was business. Yours is something different?" She stared at him, her heart thudding in her chest. His words weren't rehearsed, not polished like the speeches he gave in meetings. They were raw, unguarded. I need someone I can rely on, he continued. Not just in the office, but in the moments when everything else feels uncertain. You're the one I think of when the walls start closing in. You're the one who makes me believe this empire I've built has more to it than numbers and deals. Patricia's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him, but doubt still lingered. And what am I supposed to do with that? She asked softly. Ethan's eyes didn't waver. Trust me, the way I've come to trust you. Her breath caught. She looked down at the papers on her desk, the endless tasks that had defined her worth for so long. For years she had chased recognition, believing it would come through promotions, titles, and applause. But now, here was Ethan Clark, telling her that what he saw in her went beyond any position she could hold. She lifted her gaze back to him, her voice steady but quiet. Trust isn't something you can just ask for, Ethan. You have to earn it. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, slowly, a smile touched his lips, not the sharp, confident smirk she had seen in the boardroom, but something softer, almost shy. Then let me earn it, he said. The silence that followed was heavy but warm. Patricia felt the walls she had.